Hey, it's Bear Gardener again. I'm back with another one of my game theory videos, because they seem to have been going down quite well. I've had lots of great feedback, so those of you who have given me the great feedback, firstly, thank you so much. Honestly, I do suffer from a bit of imposter syndrome. I think we all have weaknesses, and it helps to admit them. We'll talk about that in game terms at some point as well, actually. But anyway, the positive response to this has been huge in encouraging me to do this, because this is the sort of thing that I really enjoy getting into and noodly about and making videos about. So you can probably expect a lot more of this to come at this point. Anyway, I am still a cards player and content creator. I'm a member of the Kards Contributor Program. I am neither endorsed by, paid by, or otherwise associated with 1939 Games. However, they do use my content and provide me with some support and giveaways and access to allow me to make better content for the game, which is amazing. I love this game. I play this game probably as my primary game at this point. It's just good fun to play. And I love the community and being part of it. And I am particularly enjoying being able to help people develop as players, whether that's new player experience stuff, which I've done a lot of, or stuff like this where we get into detailed game theory and strategic thought processes. I by nature, I like education and coaching. It's just something I enjoy. I like helping people achieve their goals. So we are back to one of my favourite go-to texts for strategic thinking. We're going to hop across to a quote and do what we always do, which is talk about it and how it applies to cards. This one, lots of you will probably recognise, although we'll see by the end of it whether you think the same way that you did originally. Right, so on the screen is a quote from Sun Tzu. This is an incredibly famous quote, although its translation is questionable because ancient Chinese is ancient Chinese, so different words are used in different places. But at the heart of it, this quote is awesomely popular. It's seen all over the place. So let's read through it. So the translation that I use is the one that was used in one specific study of Sun Tzu. There have been a lot of different translations and studies. This is just pulled from the one that I happen to personally like the most of those that I've read. Know the other and know yourself. 100 conflicts without peril. Know not the other and yet know yourself. 1 triumph for 1 defeat. Know not the other and know not yourself. Every conflict is certain peril. Right. Sun Tzu's language is a little flowery, and the translation means that we have to shift certain words around, so we will do. But let's unpack this in what I consider to be a useful way for the absolute core of strategy, because I believe this is one of the best quotes to embrace if you want to improve your cards gameplay after a certain point. This talks about different tiers of knowledge and application. So, first of all, conflict, obviously, match, battle, whatever you want to call it, however you want to frame that, is pretty self-explanatory. Peril is a very strong word. At least the translation, the original wording or symbolism is for a much stronger concept than we would necessarily consider peril. So, to Sun Tzu, in all likelihood. I'm not an expert on Chinese culture, but in especially ancient Chinese culture, I've read a bit, but not as much as I'd like. In all likelihood, the concept of peril, the concept of allowing an actual risk in something you're doing, would be almost completely antithetical to thinking. It's the thing you most want to avoid. Sun Tzu endlessly talks about knowing and defining and not engaging or involving yourself without certainty of triumph, or at least, again, certainty is a different word. Oh, translation's hard. Certainty in this case is what we would consider a very high likelihood. Sun Tzu wasn't foolish enough to believe that there's any such thing as an absolute in all likelihood. No one is. But he did very clearly believe in narrowing odds. Shockingly, so do I. Anyway, so, know the other and know yourself. 100 conflicts without peril. What does this actually unpack to? So this talks about, in cards terms, the value of not only knowing your deck and your playstyle, but also knowing your opponents. Now, it's interesting, because this particular quote is probably best approached in reverse. So we're actually going to skip all the way down to the bottom line, start there and work back up again, and then we'll come back to the thing holistically. So let's start at the bottom line, which is the worst case scenario. Know not the other, and know not yourself. Every conflict is certain peril. Right, quick TLDR cards translation. If you don't understand your deck as fully as you possibly can and what's in it, and then you go into a match against an opponent, and when you look at their HQ and their first couple of plays, you have no idea what they're playing, odds are you lose. Period. You've done nothing at all to narrow the odds. You have made no effort, and I mean that in the nicest possible way, but it is a truism, you have made no effort to actually narrow the odds. You're just tossing a coin and hoping it comes down in your favour. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. If that's the way you enjoy playing, go nuts to do it. But personally, it gives me goosebumps thinking about it. It's not the way that I'm inclined or trained to think. Right. Hop a line up. Know not the other, and yet know yourself. 1 triumph for 1 defeat. This is very apropos for cards. If you know your deck, you know your deck backwards, you start to know your play style and your ability, but you have made no real effort to understand or play other decks, I'll get to that in a minute, you're probably at best going to hit round about a 50% win rate. Because you've done 50% of the work, shockingly. Right, up to the top. Know the other and know yourself. 100 conflicts without peril. Now note, this is not 100 guaranteed wins. Sun Tzu would slap me upside of the head if I didn't clarify this in all likelihood, or possibly have me executed. There are parts of the man's history that aren't necessarily that pretty. Welcome to ancient warfare. But I'm not here for a history lesson. The point is that we are talking about narrowing the odds as much as we possibly can. Getting ourselves to being in the best possible position to win a conflict. Right. How the hell do you do this in cards? Stage 1. Know yourself. Knowing yourself in cards is very much based on knowing your deck, the way it plays. Yay, we're done. No. That is only a tiny part of knowing yourself. Here's a few questions that might help you get to know yourself in a conflict-based way a little bit better. What's your natural reaction when a player plays a card you haven't seen before? How do you feel when a removal effect takes away what you consider to be a key card of your deck? How long do you feel that way for? Do you send emotes in reaction? Do you swear at the screen? Do you get frustrated? When you go into a game, what's your mental state? Do you take time between games to clear your mind and go in with a positive mental state, or do you just keep ramping games constantly? How fast do you play? Do you use your turn length, or are you inclined to play quite quickly because you want to get games out of the way? No, absolutely none of the questions I'm asking are intended to be a criticism of you as a person. However, knowing the answer to these and frankly many more questions will help you to understand your own position in a conflict. Let's step out of cards for a minute. Let's go into a form of conflict with which I am unfortunately more familiar than I want to be, but also trained enough in to be able to give you a response, which is direct physical conflict. In direct physical conflict, those of us who are trained to deal with it are trained to be aware of not just an escalating situation, as in a situation in which conflict is a possibility, but our positioning, both physically and mentally, in those circumstances. Example: an unnamed person, honest gov, is in a busy club. A group of very drunken guys decide to start getting problematic with some of the clientele. The current working security man, who your unnamed person happens to know, is a bit busy with another problem. That person watches the situation, sees the escalation, notes that conflict of some form, whether verbal or otherwise, is likely, and immediately does a couple of things. Firstly, he puts down his drink. Secondly, he drinks some water. Thirdly, he takes a deep breath and relaxes, because he has been trained never to step into conflict in an unbalanced mindset. He does not puff out his chest, run forward and be like, "Yeah, you, what you doing? Don't be ridiculous," and suddenly instantly escalate the conflict. He begins by evaluation. Is there a way to end this conflict peacefully? If there is, can I do so verbally only? Do I need to be aware where support is? How many things? Anyway, oops, go figure, I was hiding it so well. My point being, those of us who are trained to alter not only our physical but mental positioning before going into a conflict. Right, back to cards. Oh, it's okay, by the way, it all ended well. There actually wasn't an issue. It de-escalated, they left. Everyone was fine. Some people might have wanted to know that. Anyway, back to cards. In the same way, when I'm going into a game of cards, I want to be calm. I don't go into a game of cards after I've just had a frustrating phone call or something annoying has happened in my life. Or rather, if I do, I hit casual mode. I do not play competitive or ranked games in a bad mindset. Ever. You also probably shouldn't. I don't want to be prescriptive, but it will help you. Right, so, another part of knowing yourself. Know your current state. Obviously, we've talked about knowing your tendencies. Right, now let's get to the other half. Know the other. Right, we're not going to get into knowing the player. That's much higher level and generally speaking only relevant in highly competitive circles where you're dealing with a smaller group of players. For example, in the OCCs, there are players, if you see them regularly, that you may know quite well and you might have a reasonable idea of what they might be doing and how they play. But that's not something we can bank on ladder and in general cards play. But what we can do is have some idea of the likelihood of the deck. So you will have seen me talk, if you have watched my video on mulligans, about putting an opponent on a deck. So when I see something like their HQ, and certainly by their first couple of plays, in my head I'm trying to be very certain of the likelihood of what deck I think they're playing, and then I want to adapt my play to that particular set of circumstances. To do this, I have to make effort, which is to say I actually have to go and learn about other decks. This is actually much easier to do nowadays than it ever has been before, because decks get shared quite a lot and there's information. A fellow content contributor called Nero, who is a good friend of mine, and you should totally check out his stuff because it's really entertaining and fun, has an ongoing Google Drive, which he freely makes available to people via a link. It's down below in the comments, in which you can go into the different nations and look at different decks, some of them pulled from OCCs, some of them pulled from ladder, some of the more generic decks. This is a hugely potent resource, and I use it all the time. A reason being, it gives me the chance to have a look at what decks are around and get an idea of what I might be playing. In doing so, I begin to have knowledge of my opponent. I begin to actually narrow the field even more, because I'm now reducing the likelihood that something surprising is going to happen. Note, reducing, not eliminating. You can't eliminate all possibility of surprise and the impact of Nope, that's another game theory video. It will be coming. There's a very good quote about it, but we're not getting into that here. But you can't. There is no absolute result. However, in doing this, you will strengthen yourself. Want to strengthen yourself even more? Play those decks, or the best version of those that you can approximate. Seriously, do it. You will be astounded as to the difference it makes. This is why I have repeatedly said that my starter guides focus on the concept of leveling more than one deck at a time. I recommend that new players to this game do not play one deck constantly to try and gain ranks. I recommend you play at least two, so that you're gaining your allied nation and main nation in cards, but also so that you're playing two different archetypes, two different ideas. Because then you actually know more. If you're only playing one deck constantly and you're just repping it endlessly to try and get results, you are narrowing your knowledge base. Narrowing your knowledge base is an inefficient way of approaching a complex mechanism. Cards is an incredibly complex ecosystem. There are 5 main nations, plus allied nations, and therefore multiple combinations that are possible, and within each of those, several sub-archetypes, each of which is narrowly different to the other, and it exponentially increases. The more you know the meta, the more efficiently you will be able to play your own deck into that meta, and the more effectively you might be able to select popping out a card and popping in another one for a specific reason. Players at high level, like J. King, Bubbles, Berto, Noin, I could list all of these amazing people who are lovely and friendly, by the way, do this all the time. And they do it because they have the knowledge. They have actually taken the time to understand more than just what they're playing, but also what they're playing into, and thinking about the statistical likelihood of putting in tech cards to deal with particular things. Simple example. It's not relevant. It probably wouldn't happen on ladder because it's way more complex than that. But for example, were there a particularly powerful drop unit that has an insane deployment effect and gains a huge buff as soon as it hits the thing, and you're seeing it regularly on ladder, you might just slip a single suppression card into your deck. Just a one-off, maybe two of, just to give you the chance of drawing it, just in case, to remove it. That's a very simplified example, and deliberately so. So please don't at me with that's a bad example. It's meant to be. It's meant to be a very simplified example. It's way more complicated than that, and it should be. But just because that part is way more complicated doesn't mean that at any level you can't gain value from what I'm talking about. You absolutely can. In following idioms like this, we gain advantages. These have been around. I mean, seriously, look at the date. 300 BCE. Take a moment to think how long ago this was written, and then take a moment to think how relevant it still is. Look at me talking about it. Knowing things like this, having them foremost in your mind when you are approaching something, gives you an advantage. That's why they stick around. As ever, I hope it's useful. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know. If you didn't, let me know. Hey, whatever, just get in touch because I like people. This has been one of what will, I'm sure, continue to be an ever-growing series, because I'm having a blast making these. I really am. This is fun stuff to talk about. So, as always, be good humans, and I will catch you next time around.